doing that as well, because everyone's looking to you.
If you ask for things, if you are open and you're willing to like put yourself out there just a little bit, that things will come to you.
Challenges do not change who you are. They reveal who you are. And what this has revealed is that during this time of great challenge, creativity still happens. Creativity still emerges. And that has been a very cool thing. So this challenge has not changed who we are, it's just revealed who we are.
I used to get calls all the time from people asking me about the station. What kind of music do you play? And the canned format was adult album alternative. And so I asked the music director, what does that actually mean? And he said, we play the good stuff. That was the end of his explanation.
Well, AAA music is heavy on the singer-songwriters and the Americana, but we also include blues music, jazz, other styles like world music.
It's not the same songs every other hour. And in 90.5's case, it's not even the same songs each week.
WCB is pretty unique with all the variety of music that we can play and the variety of shows that we have.
We've had John Prine, Ziggy Marley, Warren Haynes from the Allman Brothers. We have had Tedeschi Trucks. The list goes on and on.
The thing that we have at WCBE is experts in music that know where the good stuff is.
Homemade, locally produced programming is what we're all about, and just sort of sitting there and grooving out in a radio station, knowing that I'm doing the same thing with thousands of listeners across the state. I really dig that. I dig that sort of concept.
We're all over the map. It's great music. You know, people that go, oh, I listen to everything. If you listen to everything, all you need to do is listen to us.
I actually have a heavy interest in music. I really love music, and like as soon as I got into this classroom, I just fell in love with music. And it's something that always pushed me. I listen to it every day. It drives me. And I talked with my mom, and she told me that like my family background is music heavy on my mom and dad's side. So that, it makes total sense on like how quick I'm able to pick it up. I find enjoyment out of watching videos and seeing other producers produce and just the different sounds they bring to the producer community. So I just use that and I try to be as versatile as possible.
I didn't even know he was a basketball player because I didn't even know like he was tall because everyone's on the same little size screen. I did get to know him as a music producer, and he would make great beats and very interesting, unique sounding beats. Like not just the same loops other people were using, but different loops, making his loops, chopping his loops in different innovative ways, just having a whole unique sound.
I like beats that have very good bounce and weird bounces. So I like unusual beats that have weird sounds in them, but if it sounds good, then I like it. How I'm feeling and how I want other people to feel or react to my music, just like human interaction with the music basically is what drives me. Because a lot of times when I produce my music, it's based off how I'm feeling in a moment, and you will see that through my music.
See me proud of what I did one day, I'm gonna be proud of my kids. I know what I'm making for the times that I live, ain't done, can't go out like this. Hopefully I climb to the top of the list and be proud of what I did as a kid. My parents gonna be proud of what I did.
Sierra is a young lady in my junior class this year, and I'm really excited to have her in the class because she has such tremendous potential. She's a real go-getter. She has multiple talents. She can sing, she can produce, she has good studio prowess, and that's something that's actually kind of hard to teach. She was always, it was always obvious that she was very talented, but she has been performing a lot more and has just matured as a performer and as a musician. She's been performing at Eastmore High School, she's been performing here at Fort Hays, and she's been performing around the city with different organizations, and I'm really looking forward to what she's going to do next year as a senior.
I'm saying this because my emotions are heavy, and I promise that I'll keep this steady. Oh. I have learned a lot about production. I know a lot about performing arts and like the front stage of performing. So I want to learn the backstage of it. So like production, how to mix and stuff, so I can like do my own music at home, the mixing part, and like so I can collaborate with my dad, who also mixes my music.
Good afternoon and welcome to today's Finance and Appropriation Committee. Today is Wednesday, January 11th, 2023. I'm Chairman Michael Cole and excited to have you all here today. Today we have a pretty clear, concise, small agenda where we're going to focus a bit on, of course, our finance report, have a levy discussion, and then go into adjournment. But if we can, I don't know that we have enough to, yeah. So we're not at quorum today as it stands, but we're still going to convene our meeting and open the floor for any questions. With that in motion, let's go ahead and start with the monthly finance report. Since I can't even approve the minutes from the previous.
Nope, you can't. Right? I'm just making a note as to actually who's here. And
thank you for joining us, Eric. Hope all is well.
Absolutely. Happy to.
All right. Thank you, Chair Cole. This is the December monthly financial report. For the month, revenues in December were about $640,000 under plan, taking the year-to-date revenues to around $30 million over plan. And expenditures for the month were about $2.8 million over plan, taking that year-to-date number to $25 million below plan. On a fiscal year-to-date basis, that's about a 7% over plan variance in revenue and about a 6% below plan variance on the expenditure side. Cash balance stood at about $300 million at the end of December, and that's about $55 million above plan. Looking at the major revenue sources, no activity in property taxes. They remain right there at about 1.3 million below plan. We've started to receive advances on first half property tax collections, so we'll see those continue through January and probably into February, and still anticipate settlement in March. State aid this month, 442,000 under plan this month. Year to date, it's still year to date it's about 7 million above plan. Just remember that in the plan included a deduction, $15 million reduction in state aid due to the transportation penalty, which has not reached fruition. So that's still being held in abeyance pending the outcome of litigation. All other revenues, about 24.6 million above plan. Take a closer look at those. The very small piece on the graph that you can barely see is the restricted federal grants. Those are the subsidies from the federal government for the qualified school construction bond interest. And we received another one this month. We're up to, I think, 3 of those payments. We typically get 2, but we were behind a couple. So we're expecting 1 or 2 more this year on that line. But they're flowing. We've got the paperwork in, and they're coming to us. The no activity of property tax allocation, that's homestead and rollback, and that doesn't happen until after the March settlement in property taxes. Other revenues, the second bar from the right, about 58,000 below plan in December, and it now stands at 26.6 million above plan year to date. And in that category, pilots and other payments, other revenues in lieu of taxes, we're about $1 million below plan for the month, but still are 17.5 million above plan year to date. The Medicaid reimbursement and indirect cost line, 248,000, kind of minimal above plan for the month, and still remain 5.7 million above plan year to date. We did receive a catch-up payment from the previous year, which explains that variance. And then investment income is up 2.7 year to date above plan. This chart details those variances in that other local revenue. And other financing sources, there was no activity this past month. On the expenditure side, in total, 25 million below plan year to date. Personnel comprises 20.6 million of that. Personnel ran about $1 million over plan this month, dropping that year to date variance down to a below plan amount of about 20.6 or 6%. Compared to last year at this time, personnel is now about 2.9 million higher, or just 0.9%. So a couple of things we're looking into on personnel. First of all, the flow of personnel you'll see here is a little bit convoluted because of the construction of the plan. I think we front-end loaded it too much. But second issue is, why are we not above last year as much? We think it's primarily due to vacancies, but we're going to have to dig into that. On the non-personnel side and all others, they're just running at 4.5 million below plan, comprised of purchase services, supplies, and materials, and the transfer out in that category, all contributing to that variance. If we move and look at the behavior of personnel, you'll see what I'm talking about. This is just salary and wages. It's tracking similar to behavior in last year, the gray line. The blue line is the plan. But you see for the first 3 months of the quarter, we were well under plan. And now in the second quarter, we're much more on plan, which is one reason why I like reporting to the board on a quarterly basis. Some of these variances will work themselves out. But I think that plan will be to actually exceed that plan over time because of the front-end loading. And you'll see the same effect when we look at personnel. I'm sorry, when we look at benefits side. It's mirroring the behavior of last year. It's mirroring the behavior we expect in the plan, but again, under plan in that first quarter and now at or above plan in the second quarter. For the second quarter, total personnel costs, salaries and benefits combined, are pretty much on plan, and all of the variance was in quarter one, where they ran about 20 million under plan. So I think it's just a front-end loading of the plan. That'll work itself out. But I'm more concerned about why I guess it's interesting. I'm concerned that we're not further spending a lot more than we did last year in personnel. But we did, we had a pay increase. We've got steps. You would expect that number to be in that 3, 4, 5% range above at this point in time, and it's not. It's less than 1% above. So we'll be, we're going to have to go in and kind of check person by person almost to see what's going on.
But nobody's missing a paycheck.
Not that I've been informed of at this point. We're not skipping an entire segment of our population. And again, going back to non-personnel, they in total add up to being about $4.5 million below plan. Purchase services, 4.7 below plan. They were under this month a little bit. Supplies, materials, now 6.5 million below plan. They were over plan a bit this month, and capital outlay much smaller number. They're within 300,000. You can see on the chart there that the graph, the bars of the graph are on top of one another. That was over for the month, but it's on plan year to date. The far right-hand bar, all other uses, that's entirely related to transfer and advance activity in previous months. Comparing this year to last year, total revenues and expenditures, on the left-hand graph, you can see that through December we were building a cash balance this year, $489 million in revenue versus $425 million in expenditures. However, last year at this time, we had a slight decline in cash balance where expenditures actually exceeded revenue through December. So we began in December to eat through that cash balance. December typically within the year is a low cash balance month because we're right in between the two property tax collection periods. But as you can see this year, we actually did build a cash balance right through December. Now, a lot of this, remember, is convoluted by transfers and advances and the impact that the ESSER fund has had because it required such a large temporary advance at the end of the year. And then it came back to us. So you've got $79 to $80 million going out in expenditures and coming back a month later in revenues. And then later this year, we'll advance an additional, probably large amount over the fiscal year and then bring that back in July of 23. So it gets a little convoluted there, but the report breaks those non-operating expenses and revenues out for you for your review. On the right-hand graph, just comparing revenues last year versus this year, you can see that we're up about $122 million. $13 million of that is more state aid. $27 million is other local. That's those pilots. Remember the July activity in early August when they rushed to beat the deadline of that new law going into effect for those outside agreements. And then $80 million other financing sources, which has to do with the return of the advance. On the expenditure side, we're spending about $44 million total, different more than last year. $3 million of that's personnel, like I said, 0.9%, not much. And then the $36.6 million transfer out for capital funding this year that wasn't done last year. And then $5 million in non-personnel, kind of a non-material type of an increase, but an increase nonetheless. So that's it for the month of December. Like I said, the next activities up are the property tax advances in January. We'll see some adjustments to foundation monies. DPIA is rolling in at they had them, I think, at 16% phased in. They're bringing that up to 33% phased in. I think I heard that that'll be factored in February. We should see that. There are some changes in transportation, but that won't affect us because of whether you do it miles or students, and that won't affect that calculation for us. And I think I've talked to you too about the special ed with all the transportation changes we've done, and we tended to mainstream our special ed students across more buses. You heard Mr. Stufflebean talk about moving all that equipment around, and so when we spread the special ed students out, it's kind of a counterproductive mechanism for reimbursement in that you want to I guess we want to mainstream special ed students with other students, but when you do that, if you don't have more than like 51% of the students on a bus as special ed, that bus trip doesn't qualify for reimbursement. So we're doing what we're supposed to be doing with those students, and yet we get penalized financially. There's a word for that. Not sure what word that is exactly, but it's counterproductive certainly, and that costs us $3 to $4 million in state funding in terms of that reimbursement. So that's it for December. If there's any questions, I'd be glad to answer those.
Are there any questions about the monthly financial report at this point in time? Awesome, awesome. So before we move on to the levy planning discussion, I want to preface it with this thought in mind. The prevailing thought of this particular document is for us to very seriously consider what it is the district needs in terms of resources, and having a very clear idea, even if we were to disaggregate it on a per student basis, what that amount actually is, and how much of it is actually based on student outcomes, not just adult performance, but student outcomes that are going to move the needle for children. Now, forgive me if what I'm saying to you sounds really common sensory. I don't intend it to be, and I don't believe that common sense is common, quite honestly. I will say this, though. It's now really time for us to reimagine this budget from a different perspective, figure out how we see food a little differently here, all right? So with that in mind, before we get started, if we can take the attendance here. Thank you for showing up, Jordan. No worries, Mr. J, no worries. Glad you made it. So if we first can do a call to order.
Certainly. President Adair?
Present.
Board Member Brown?
Here, online.
Thank you. Board Member and Chair Cole?
Present.
Mr. Green? Ms. Johnson?
Here.
Mr. Jordan?
Here.
And Mr. Miller. So now you have a quorum.
Awesome. And if we can go ahead and approve the minutes, is there a motion to approve our last meeting's minutes?
I'll make the motion to approve.
All right, moved
Second.
and seconded. Yep. If there are no objections, say it again.
2 sets of minutes.
Oh, there were 2 sets.
One
Gotcha.
motion to approve them both. Yeah.
Gotcha.
November 9th and December 14th. We can take them. We can take them together.
Oh, we can. Great.
Sure. All set?
Yep.
All right. Chair Cole?
Yes.
Ms. Johnson?
Yes.
Mr. Jordan?
Yes.
President Adair?
Yes.
That motion carries.
All right. Now we can go ahead and move to the levy planning discussion. And again, you're going to see some things that kind of level set us as to where we have been in the past to date, but at the same time, give a look at some guiding assumptions moving forward that we need to take under serious consideration and dialogue as this committee, and of course, subsequently as our board. So the prevailing thought is irrespective of the cost, what is it that our children need to move to next in terms of student outcomes? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And thank you. So this is, I would say, the beginning, but we always have this ongoing conversation because of the 5-year forecast. Well, the purpose of 5-year forecast, at least from the numbers standpoint, is to give an indication of where you're headed in terms of financial condition, and to give you a heads up that when you need to do something to respond to that look out into the future. I think every forecast I presented, when you go out to that, if not within a couple of years, certainly out in the 5-6 year and beyond range, because I do extend it another 5 years, that cash balance line turns south for us. And that's an untenable, unsustainable situation to be in. And at some point in time, as we look at it, we've got to decide, how do we address that? School districts have one of 2 things to do: increase revenue or decrease expenditures. This last, and as I get into these assumptions, you'll see that this last forecast proposed a bit of the reduction in expenditures approach. And now, when we talk about tax levy, we'll be talking about the revenue side of things. So where are we today, given the forecast and kind of things that we know? Just go back and recount for you that the November forecast that we adopted, the target there was to set up the assumptions such that FY26 ending cash balance, not a 60-day reserved ending cash balance, but the ending cash balance would in fact be positive. That would allow us to sign certain contracts, enter into obligations, and operate. But that forecast is only as good as the assumptions upon which it is predicated. So as a reminder, we assumed in state aid that there would be no additional phase-in of the funding formula. We assumed that we would continue to have declining enrollment, and that combined with increasing federal adjusted gross income and increasing property values and declining enrollment, the first two being in the denominator and the latter being in the numerator to determine our local share, our state share would be going down because we would appear to be richer in that formula. Therefore, state aid would be declining over the life of this forecast. And we included that transportation non-compliance penalty in each and every year of the forecast going out. Now, what we know today, we might question that assumption, especially on the transportation non-compliance penalty, is, as you know, beginning in January, we have a whole new routing system. So how do we do that? How will that come out? Are we on time? Are we going to get as many complaints about not being on time or not being in compliance with a 30-minute window transportation requirement? When I ask Rodney, he goes, "Well, that's what we're supposed to be doing. That's our goal. That's our objective." So we'll see how that works out. But that's one line that we could potentially call into question as we get ready to prepare either for a levy and certainly for the May forecast. On the personnel side, we agreed that I put plus 2.5, and I should have added in there, in the out years, outside of our collective bargaining agreements. We had 1%. We felt it would be better and more reasonable to put in 2.5. I think that's still a pretty good assumption. ESSER, always a big question, but in terms of personnel, none of the personnel we plan on rolling into the general fund, at least for this forecast. We decided that we would make a commitment to capital budgeting, so we'd put in a $20 million transfer each year in the forecast for a capital budget. And then one of the last things we added, and this is the expenditure reduction side, was to make this all work, we had to look at holding our non-personnel budgets at the FY23 level and the FY23 budget level, and then for 24, find about $35 million worth of reductions. And we're in the middle of a budget process to do that. And we're looking at this point at doing that in the non-personnel category. About a 30% across the board reduction there. But we're working through that. We need to see what's the picture, what does that really mean? Can we do that? Can we not do that? What are the impacts of that? And you'll hear more about that as we work through this the rest of this month and into February. Presentations will be to you on the overall 24 budget in March as I prepare for an April presentation of the 5-year forecast. But that's where we are and how we got to a 26, into fiscal year 26, cash balance of essentially zero. It's a couple $100,000, but essentially zero at that point. That's where we are. What does that look like in terms of the picture? As soon as I get my notes to follow along. The purple line is as adopted, and you can see that essentially it's 0 and 26, and then it goes, tails off and is negative thereafter. And the 60-day reserve balance, I know Chair Cole and I have talked about 30 and 60. I've opted for 60. If you want 30, just go halfway in between. Pretty straightforward path, all right? But 60 is the kind of the industry standard for what your target really should be. So we set this forecast up not in alignment with that kind of recommended practice of shooting for 60 days. We set those assumptions up to get cash to zero. So you can see here that we don't meet the 60 days reserve balance in any year except for the current 23 fiscal year. But that's the picture as it stands right now. So as we get into levy planning, wanted to refresh your knowledge about the timing of levies. And by timing, I mean when we vote, when's it collected, and which fiscal year fiscal years, it's intended to fund before you have to come back for another tax levy. This is speaking on the operating side. Permanent improvement and bond, totally different discussion. So on an operating levy standpoint, typically we work in 4-year cycles. So this chart here is laid out, calendar years running across the top, and fiscal years are denoted by the combination of 2 blocks of time. Late one calendar year, the second half of one calendar year, and the first half of the first calendar year, colored the same to indicate a fiscal year. So fiscal year 24 is in light blue, latter part of 23 calendar year and the first part of calendar 24. And it applies to both. These are just 2 different graphs or charts to show you the impact during the time period covered and when collections begin, whether we vote in November of 23, coming up this fall, or we wait and go in November of 24. In the case of 23, we vote, so I've got it marked there, the latter half of 23. You're actually in fiscal 24 at that point in time. It doesn't begin to be collected until January of the following calendar year. So it's not really intended to solve any financial problems in that fiscal year. You're too late for that. You can't, the levy, you have to raise in 6 months what you need for a year. That's just not mathematically, doesn't make any sense. I have put in a red dotted box the 4 fiscal years that a November of 23 levy initiative would be intended to fund, be fiscal 25, 26, 27, and 28. So when we look at targets for a November 23 levy initiative, the target would be a cash balance or a 60-day cash balance at the end of fiscal 28. And then we'll see what that takes to do that. You move to November of 24, and simply everything moves a year down on these charts. You vote in November of 24, the latter half of calendar year 24, which really is the first half of fiscal year 25. It's first collected in January of 25. Now, this 4-year period that the levy would be intended to fund is 26, 27, 28, and 29. And so we would look to that June 30, 29 cash balance or 60-day reserved cash balance as a target to be positive when we look at our millage impact. So let's look at some, given these assumptions for the forecast. Remember, the forecast was set up with 26 in mind. Now for the levy, we're looking at either 28 or 29. We've gone out a bit. So given these assumptions, what does it take? So this is grouped. The top half is a vote in November of 23, and we have 2 targets, ending cash to be 0 or 60-day reserved cash to be 0. The first 2 lines under voted November 23 is with the ending cash target to be 0. And I boxed in blue what our target is, the 4 years in question and where our target is. So we would have to have 5.4 mils voted in November of 23 in order for FY28 to hit 0. Drop down 2 lines, change your target. Now change your target not to cash, but 60 days reserved cash. I boxed in the lower line of those 2. You see that it runs to 0 and 28. That takes 8.36 mils. So to cover our 60-day cash is about 3 mils. And it makes a $168 million difference in the ending balance in 28. Let's go to voting in 24. Now we're looking out to 29. To get 29 to 0 just in cash is 8.86 mils. If our target is 60 days cash reserve, it's 11.92. So this demonstrates a couple of things. It demonstrates what's the cost of meeting that industry standard of 60-day cash in terms of millage. And it also identifies for you the millage cost differential of waiting a year. Now, admittedly, it still only lasts 4 years. I suppose you could ask me and I could run it. What would the millage be in 23 if we wanted to make 29 positive? And you can see that it could probably be several more mils, to say the least. But that's another analysis I could run. But for this purposes, I kept everything constant. A 4-year levy cycle, when do you start? 23 or 24. Part of the reason in that is that the balances, obviously in 28, are higher than the balances in 29, so you don't have to make up quite as much. All right, so that's that downward sloping cash balance curve I showed you earlier that's creeping in here. So that's putting some numbers to all of this so that you know when we're talking about going on the ballot, if the assumptions of our forecast are correct, this is what we'd be looking at. So for this discussion, I'll lead with some questions, and then we'll open it up here in a minute. But as you've heard me mention and allude to, one of the key questions we need to discuss is, do the assumptions for the November forecast remain reasonable? Should we draw some of those into question? And that may change over the time that we're talking about this. We'll talk this month, next month, April. If you're looking at a 23 operating levy, the board needs to take action in June. They take a hiatus in July. If you want to wait till July, that's fine, but I've always said June. You've got deadlines in the very first week of August for filing. So typically we want to come back in June, have the recommendation, and act on it. So we can have this conversation this month, next month, March. We'll have a May forecast come out. But anyway, do these remain reasonable? That's one of the first questions.
Committee, are you asking this
no,
now?
I'm not asking yet. Well, can we come? Let me go through them all and let's come back to them.
Got you.
All right. I always ask this question. Often I ask it first. Is there a preconceived ceiling on the amount of millage that we can place on the ballot? This is a question for the board, a question for the committee, anybody who wants to offer an answer. Is there, boy, I don't want to put anything more than 7 mills on the ballot at any one time. If that's one of the variables, one of the parameters or constraints, that if we have that, it's good to know, because then that drives, as you can see, it drives. There wasn't a number on that except for the one vote in 23 gets us out to 28. It was 5 and change in millage. If you wanted to be under 6, something's got to change in all these assumptions, because 6 doesn't work. You probably don't like the 11 mill number, so something has to change. Something has to change. Second, we have another issue looming out there, and that's our capital needs. Our assumption in our forecast is that we're going to fund that from an operating levy. We're going to take money out of the operating fund, $20 million a year, and fund capital, because by golly, we need to be doing capital improvements. Do you still want to do that, or do you want to put a permanent improvement levy on the ballot? Additionally, the Facility Master Plan, FMP, on this slide, calls for a bond issue. And earlier this year, or earlier last year, we're in 23 now, so in 22, we went through all the steps to put a proposal on the ballot for a $680 million bond issue to fund the PI needs for segments 4 and 5, and that would have been 2.93 mils, and a 4.7 mil PI levy to fund ongoing life cycle replacement of our capital. That didn't make it to the ballot. It wasn't voted on, but I put it there to just let you know that last year, that's the kind of millage we were looking at. So when we look at timing of operating millage and then a bond issue and or permanent improvement levy, you can add them together. If you put 5 mills operating and 4 mills PI levy, you're looking at 9 mills, that kind of a thing. All right, so just giving you numbers that you can work with. Although it's an assumption in the forecast, I also put down here a key driver. What's proposed in the state budget for school funding? You've got the mechanism, the Fair School Funding Formula, that hopefully will remain intact. And then the question of is, do you fund it? Do you phase in money to continue to pay for it? The idea was that there was a 6-year phase in. We're coming up on year 3 and 4 in this biennial budget. So what's that going to look like? We should know more in, Eric, how many days?
3 weeks.
About 3 weeks in the governor's budget, and then you have to keep your ear to the ground. Katie knows this. about, what's the General Assembly going to do. What's the plan for the FTE currently paid by the expiring ESSER funds? They coming over? They not coming over? Do we handle it through attrition, through open vacancy? What are we doing? And I think at some point, last check I had, I want to say, 430 some people. We've got to figure out where are they going, and at least have a pretty good idea so that we can plug that in here. Right now, they have to be a net zero cost coming over. That's the assumption. We can change that assumption because we have a different plan, but we need that as we plan for this levy. There are also, in addition to just FTE, there are programs over there. Do we like them? Are they valuable? Are they productive? Do we bring them over? If so, how do we pay for them? That needs to be identified and discussed. For instance, I'll pick on Alex Trevino's capital improvements. We've done a fair amount of HVAC work and other capital improvements out of ESSER. That would be something that we go, yeah, well, that's not going to roll over, but we've got $20 million in capital over here. So I don't have to say, well, we've already replaced that roof, or we've already done that HVAC, or whatever Alex has done. We've already done that. That isn't something that you would say, well, what are we going to do with that? Well, that's done. We don't have to worry about that coming over. You do have to worry about capital funding, but we don't have to worry about that. I don't know enough about, well, yes, Catherine knows all about ESSER, and so she'll be able to speak to us at some point about what programs come over in addition to what people. And last, and this was kind of funny when I shared it with Chair Cole, he felt that the last bullet point should be the first bullet point because this is really the reason why we're here. We opted to put it last as the crown jewel of questions. So either way, what are the resources needed to improve student outcomes? These are all individual questions about particular types of expenditures. But the overarching question is, what are the resources does the district need to improve student outcomes? And that will undoubtedly drive our expenditures and what we ask for in millage. Just a little summary here so that you could see in terms of operating millage and bond issue and permanent improvement. In case you want to do some quick math in your head in the discussion. We vote in 23, it's either 5.4 or 8.36. If you vote in 24, it's either 8.86 or 11.92. Under these sets of assumptions, remember that. And then a bond issue and a permanent improvement levy. Remember the bond issue, $680,000 based upon last year's cost sets? We got to get new cost sets now. So it could be more, it could be less. The board was requesting, or at least some board members were requesting more details about Seg 5, similar to what we had in Seg 4. So that's got to be worked out. I am most comfortable with, because I've been working on this since 2016, I am absolutely comfortable and convinced that the permanent improvement levy of 4.7 mils is needed to fund what we need on an ongoing basis to meet our life cycle replacement needs. So there's your numbers. I think at this point it gets to some questions and discussions you have, but that's where we are. That's our assumptions under the forecast. I put some numbers with it if we solve our problem with revenue, and some theoretical numbers on capital. So have at it, Chair Cole. It's back to you.
All right. So before we even begin the conversation, I want to say that part of our process as a board is that we're going to also convene, we're going to develop an ad hoc committee that will be co-chaired by myself and Madam President Adair. So this conversation begins here. Until we establish this ad hoc committee, this conversation, as I see it, will remain here as, a driver for helping us make some critical decisions. And the floor is always open for the administration to illuminate, to uplift things that, otherwise could be considered as other variables for this budget. So please don't hesitate by any means to not bring things to the table if necessary. But I want to open the floor for any discussions around the questions that were developed. Any thoughts at this point? If you want to go back to your set of questions, your first three set of questions about reasonability of of the current assumptions. I think it's the next slide.
That was my first one. There's your numbers. The first question about whether or not the assumptions we made several months ago in the November forecast, are they still reasonable? And for levy planning purposes, should we adjust them? And keep in mind, I can run a forecast anytime. It's a plug and play kind of a thing. So if you tell me, add this or take this out or change that, we go back, give me a couple hours and I'll have it back to you.
I think absent the idea of any anticipated, inflation, I think absent that, for me, for Michael, these considerations seem reasonable. Eric, do you have any thoughts?
Sure. Thank you. I think that at least if we're looking at the first page of assumptions, the state funding, looks right. I think that given this legislature and the way elections went this past November, there will be a continuing war on public education. And the General Assembly is not likely to do any favors or good things for public education. I think that we need to expect that they're not going to increase the funding or phase in the formula that Cupp-Patterson recommended. I think that the 2.5% still is reasonable on personnel. And I think that our decision not to roll ESSER personnel into the general fund is prudent. And I think we need to stick with that for now. And those were one-time monies. And I think we need to treat them as one-time monies and not automatically just assume that that will continue as general fund. I think the 20 million for capital budget is probably the minimum that we need to make that work. We don't want to get off this replacement schedule now that we've got one. I think it's important that we make those transfers at least until we have a permanent improvement levy that will fund that kind of work. And finally, the general fund budget, this makes prudent sense, especially in this time of uncertainty and uncertainty about what and whether we'll pass in the near future. We have to pass some things. I'm beginning to wonder if the numbers, and I'm getting ahead of myself, but the ceiling on the millage, I'm beginning to wonder if this should be broken into two. We talked about doing that the last time, putting the PI and the permanent improvement levy and the bond issue together, conceivably in 23, and then putting the operating levy on in 24. But I'm open on all those fronts to reconsider.
Anyone else? Thank you for that, Board Member Brown. Anyone else?
Just a clarifying question. Well, first, Stan always sets the gold standard for everyone. I love the color block, how you did the calendar versus that, so that's just helpful. So thank you. I'll be sharing that out with other treasurers. But clarifying point, the 20 million that would be transferred over, is that, if we went with the bond issue and the PI levy, would that still be the plan? Or
No.
that's okay, all right.
This is a proxy for that.
Okay,
Absolutely.
all right, thank you.
Thank you for that question, and thank you for that clarification. Yes, this is just something that actually supplement to ensure our fidelity in the space of, continuing recycle replacement. Absolutely. Any additional questions about the drivers. Okay, now we can go on to your questions. And this is not necessarily just in the idea of answering the question, but at least even giving us some valuable feedback in the things that we need to consider moving forward. We don't anticipate or expect you to have an answer for everything, but I think it's very helpful at least to provide some advising feedback, if you will, some wise counsel from you experts. So is the ceiling or on the millage placed on the ballot? Is there a ceiling? Is there an idea for a ceiling? Now, for me, Michael speaking, part of what I struggle with is what I know is the need of the district and what the price tag, at least in millage, is to meet that need. I struggle between that ideal aspirational thinking and the other side that is used to what I've, been a part of in levy and bond ballot issues in the past. And that is how affordably can we make this? I've always appreciated the fact that when we went on the ballot before, it was around the idea that, this was the cost of a pizza on a monthly basis. So this was actually discretionary income that was an investment on the part of children. Now, based on how much we find is the valuation per house, per 100,000 on a home, that gives us a clearer sense of what this would monthly be. I think that should be something to be considered. But at this point in time, I'm really much more in the headspace of wanting to support the ultimate optimum needs of our children and our idea of how we want to reimagine Columbus City Schools. And it looks like my partner in crime here, my Madam President, is on the same page as I am. But I just want to let you know personally just where I kind of struggle, but ultimately where I'm leaning. Anyone else?
To me, there is a natural, I've seen it in the school finance world, there's a natural place of when you start getting 10 mils and above, people, their eyebrows go up. And I think that's just across the state what I've seen is that's almost like that. It's almost like the $10 ticket price at a movie or a 15. There's a ceiling in people's minds, right or wrong, regardless of the need. That is a ceiling in some people's minds, and it really becomes a lot of work to get past the inertia of people at that point. So to me, it is finding that happy medium that maybe it's a chunked approach. Yes, there are things. This is what we can do for this amount, and what you're willing to invest at 5 mils gets us this outcome, and what we can do with that. If you're willing to invest a little bit more, then that's where we take the next step to. And I think you have to make the case of what that is. But when you look at the 5 mils, 6 mil, that's kind of a sweet-ish spot, if you will, for some voters that would probably get there. I think that's at least my inclination of what I see. And there's no question, Stan, that you're right about. I think there's a lot of people who would say we see the need from a permanent improvement and a facilities need. We see an ongoing need, and by demonstrating that through bond issue or a PI levy or whatever, that I think that is a recognition that it has a lot of value to the community when they look at that.
Thank you for that, Mr. Jordan. Anyone else?
I agree. I think a lot of it's communication too. So whatever we decide on or the district decides on, I think voters, if they understand why, I don't know if there is a ceiling, but I think, I think anytime you put a levy on the ballot, being able to carve out what is being funded by the amount, what you're asking. And personally, I like the PI being able to separate it out. That makes communication easier, right? So in the total millage that we're looking at, there's PI rolled in, right, on the other, those assumptions. Is that a way to think about it, Stan?
Which other millage?
So on,
This is the only spot, the 4.7 stands alone.
but there are other scenarios where we're looking at,
Right, the 60-day versus the 30 days.
right, like all of that kind of roll has PI.
No, this is only
Nope.
operating.
Operating.
Nope, only operating.
Only operating.
Yep.
But in our plan and our assumption, we're saying 20 million a year gets transferred for PI purposes, right?
Correct.
That is
So-
correct.
So, so I understand it's but so a part of when you, am I confusing that? So that 20 million is getting transferred over. I understand it's operating funds, right? But they're being used for permanent improvements.
Right,
Right,
and
in that.
you're correct. If we're going to do analysis,
Cycle
you said to me, do an analysis where we put a PI levy on and you don't need the 20.
Yes, that's
all of
what
that
I.
millage goes down. You are
Yeah,
correct.
yes, and so that's where so so that number changes, and I don't know how much it changes.
And we
but-
generate a little over 12 million per mill.
Okay.
So don't use the 4.7, but
use a smaller mill.
12. Let's say it's worth close to 2 mils. To pull that out, so roughly. It's not perfect, but
Yeah.
So and they're just communicating that. So still, our plan would be the same. You know, so we're 20 mil, we'd be transferring over for PI, but if we just put a millage for PI, then that millage number for operating goes down because, and you can, and then just they're distinguished, right? I think that just as a.
So just to help me,
Yeah, it's not straight math. Can you go to the
Yeah.
last slide?
yeah, that's a good point. This is where we get into
It's
kind
not-
of scenario
You
analysis.
can't just
Yeah.
like add them across, because if we decide to put the PI at the same time as operating, our plan is to use the PI and not do the transfer of the
Correct.
into the
Yes.
operating. So those numbers would go down because the assumption is it's got 20 million operating
Built
or
into it.
transferring into it already. So we would pull that assumption out, and it would change that operating millage.
Good call. I don't know why my staff didn't see that. I'll have to speak to them about that.
So the numbers would be smaller.
just a little smaller. yeah.
If we do
right, not
and maybe even like if we know we're going to do PI first and then operating second, or putting them together.
And so then the timing, right? So if we were going to separate and do the bond issue PI, you're kicking out when we're asking for the operating, then so that has cost to it, right? So it's a complicated, but
It's complicated, yes, but no.
but right, yeah, right.
It's just another, I mean, that's the purpose of this conversation, is to hear this and go, okay, so let's put together some scenarios that you might think are reasonable. Let's do a PI levy in 23, push the operating off to 24. What's the operating look like?
Right.
Those decisions have absolutely no impact on the bond issue.
Right.
Right.
So the bond issue is what it is, but it's a great point. We could go back, pull the 20 million out, run that scenario, assuming that we do a PI levy. And then we can look at the total impact. One of the things we don't have, and I think Board Member Cole, you mentioned, what's that monthly cost? That's just a math calculation.
Absolutely, it's
We
simple.
can do that too. So when I say to you 8 mils, and you go, well, that doesn't sound too bad. But if I say to you it's going to be 800, it's not, but be $800 more per month, you'd go, well, hang on a minute. That might be off the table. Or whatever. So that's just another part of a scenario presentation that helps provide information to communicate what this would look like.
Mr. Jordan.
And I think Katie's point is right about how to communicate that.
Right.
When I think of it, there are a lot of people, we live in this world all the time. So when we throw around the term mill, it means something. And I think I use this example all the time when I was at the Department of Education, that when you go and buy a gallon of gas, the little tiny 9 is 9 mils, because people don't think about, we deal with mills every day in our lives, but that's not something you think about. Every gallon of gas has 9 mils on it. So if you explain it like you talked about, the value of a pizza for this period of time, that's one of those communication things that when I would go out and speak to people, I would see light bulbs go off. Oh, mills. that's not a big deal. I do that every day. And so we kind of overcome that inertia of people, because if they don't know, they're going to say no. But if they do start to understand it, and it's we live in the world, so we have to help people understand that this is really not as scary maybe as it would come across.
And ultimately an investment.
Absolutely. And
Ultimately an
it's a
investment.
good investment for people.
And, interesting, Jeff, the recent legislation that changed the ballot language.
Yeah.
I'm going to use the word was intended to speak to that clarification. I just intended to speak to that clarification and turn it into a dollar cost for a certain value of a home property owner.
Right.
And that's, again, give me a couple hours, but this helps in terms of what information you'll need over the next few months, and this ad hoc committee might need to, here's what we finance people look at in terms of millage, but here's how it comes out the other end in terms of the taxpayer bill, either annually or monthly. And you use pizza, and I was just thinking the other day, I bought a pizza and I went, holy cow, that was $22 or $24. I remember putting an issue on the ballot, and it was $7 for a pizza. Been around a long time.
Not
so
anymore.
Thank goodness the pizza has gotten more expensive in this particular case.
There you go. As it relates to, we talked a little bit about timing. We did kind of, in your comments, interjected that conversation. But again, I definitely want to reassert the importance that 2024 is the cutoff. 2024 is the cutoff. What we decide to do this year and have the courage of conviction to move forward on puts us in a better position for 2024. Again, your comments alluded greatly to that. But 2024 is the cutoff. It is. So, yes.
I think some more scenarios. I would like to see it with the 30-day cash that was suggested, as well as those tweaks that Katie was mentioning. But also, now I lost it. It will come back to me. There was one more scenario I wanted to think about.
Is this first in cash with 5.4 and 8.8?
Oh, I know what it was.
Go ahead.
Sorry, you mentioned if we took 2023 out for 5 years, what would that look like instead of the traditional 4? Because if we did that and we told people, hey, you're actually getting a savings, that could be another sell. What would that look like if we considered 2023 as a 5-year instead of a 4?
Who's taking copious notes over?
Somebody over there.
I'm trying to read the room, so you guys take notes for me.
Now, do understand.
Eric's got a question.
Go ahead, Eric. I'm sorry. I didn't see you.
Thank you. No problem. But, going back to the comment about is there a ceiling? I sense that there is. It always had been around 10 or more. But I think the one thing that I can't imagine that we would be able to do is pass all 3 of these at the same time. Maybe. Because at that point, we're getting up into the mid-teens with millage. And I don't see that as feasible.
I think the thing to put in the question, because
I think we should consider breaking it up.
No, I hear you. I think the thing that we need to consider on the scenario basis, and I think Madam President is going to allude to it, is the idea that this millage might be a little smaller than what we initially have considered, just because of the things that you illuminated. So,
because really the assumption changes, we are taking out the 20.
Absolutely, including when you add the assumption of the assumption of extension. So we're going from this traditional 4-year concept to a 5-year concept, for example. Again, that might be a dynamic that influences the millage amount in favor of us.
But I think it comes back to the, what did you call it, Stan, the ultimate question or whatever, the capstone question, whatever you said it was. I mean, I think we first need to understand what it's going to take to educate and what it is that we need for our students, and then come back and say, because it really, talking in just straight numbers and just putting an artificial cap is how we've gotten here sometimes. Right? We just, we're afraid. We can't be afraid anymore. We got to ask for what we need, and we'll see what that reaction is, and that's part of the political process, right? And figuring out what is it that our community is willing to invest in. And then come back and make, really informed decisions based on that and data and information about what it is that our students need. I think having the cap question right now is a little premature because we don't have some of that information.
I'll push on it. I mean, I think it's still a valuable one. But I'm glad that we're asserting from the table here, though, to have the courage of our conviction to ask. And we've said this before, quite honestly, to ask for what we know we need for our children.
29.
Yep. So as you guys on the administrative side are designing and prioritizing where we want to see our children be based on our goals or how we want to exceed our goals, I think you are a major part, working in collaboration with the Treasury. You guys are a major part of designing that budget in a make sense kind of way. So yeah. All right, moving forward.
Hang on just a second. You guys are just giving me, just so you know, it's 8, isn't it? So I got my file up, so you asked the question, what if we go out to 29 with a 23 levy and take 20 million out? 8 mils.
Look at that.
So you buy another year. It's more than, and that's
Is that for NCAS or 60 days?
that's for 60 days.
Beautiful.
Oh.
So you reduce the millage by taking the 20 out, and you vote in 23.
Sure.
Nice.
A much
Love my
different
spreadsheet.
conversation. That's right.
And I think explaining, what all of that millage means, right? So schools, bond issue, we have PI levy, and then operating. I think that's. I think it's also for
and what those
community.
different kinds of money
Monies
buys
buys and- right.
for your
right.
educational purpose.
Yes.
Because I think that's another confusing point is people, it's not well understood that green money is not green money in this context.
Right.
And just so you know, that 8, because you took the 20 out, you got to put the 4.7 on.
Yes.
Right.
No,
Right.
that's the assumption that we go for permanent improvement.
And I was just trying to do end cash, just so you could see what that 20 mils gets you, and do ending cash to 28. So the end of the levy is the same, but I take the 20 out. Okay. So hang on, we're at that line. So. Now, about 3.7. So remember when I said I 44 years noodled 2? You're pretty close.
Right.
And this is 3.7 for.
It was just take it out to the 4-year period, ending cash only. I was just saying if we take the 20 million, just move that one variable. 5.4 drops to 3.7.
Awesome.
And then you add the 4.7, and now you're at 10.
And that in cash is 30 days, not 0.
No, it's 0. It's 0. So you want me to add the 30 days?
So I
Yes,
would think put the
yes.
30-day column in.
Yes, I mean, what we typically behave at is 30 days, and we've done this for years. This is how we currently behave towards our budget. We have never, pretty much the tenure of my membership of this board, we haven't balanced to 0. We have typically balanced. This has been a continuing paradigm.
We've always shot for 30. I introduced 60 here in the last year and a half.
Correct. Yep. We've always behaved to 30. So, are there any additional comments or thoughts?
I'm just, it would be interesting, you could put all of it on, right? So the bond issue PI together and you separate the questions too for 23 and.
Yeah, I wouldn't do.
Well, I mean,
ye-
that's.
Yes,
yeah.
you can.
Yep.
I wouldn't recommend that.
Mhm.
But that's the purpose of this discussion.
yeah.
Throw an idea out. It's a very safe environment.
Well, yeah, we got to look at all of it, I think. Because we have to also balance what else is on the ballot, and that's more of the political side of things
Mm-hmm.
still.
Yep.
Like we know we have a presidential in 24, but we have this possible marijuana thing in 23.
So we're picking up some, modifications. Add a 30-day cash reserve as a target. Maybe stretch a levy a year beyond the 4-year, either one. If we do one, we can do the other. That's easy. And do a combo of not necessarily at the same time, but look at at knowing that if you take the 20 million out, at some point you got to put the 4.7 on. So maybe it's at the same time. Maybe it's operating in 23, PI in 24. What's that look like, millage? Flip those two. We can do those kind of permutations. Yeah, I think those are permutations of those variables.
The last thing I definitely like the Treasury to consider is, and give us as a board and even as a committee to an extent, the opportunity to really think through again is how do we leverage some of this opportunity in partnership with our greater municipality? And that would largely be the city of Columbus. Where is there a win-win situation that we can identify that can incorporate some of those bond costs for community advantage? For example, if we were to share assets, community assets with a new community facility, a recreation center of some sort, it sounds like they're ready to run the band to that too. They're playing their cheer music for that. But for example, if we were able to create some sort of shared facility, recreation, education-based, something that provided in-school hours opportunities and after-school hour opportunities. Well, how do we go in on that together in a way that shares costs? It's time now for us to start, an advantage for us to start thinking out of the box on that. Just up north in Akron, this is something that they actually did. So I think it's now time, we've given ourselves the time to have that kind of conversation in planning as well. So I would love to hear moving forward via this table or the ad hoc where we're looking at leveraging those opportunities too. Yeah. If there aren't any other thoughts or comments, seeing none, seeing none, I want a motion for an adjournment.
And I'm assuming we're going to continue this discussion next Finance Committee.
Absolutely.
Okay, so we'll add that to the agenda as well. And if we, well, I don't know what's next on our, I don't know whether Catherine's up again. Yep. Is Catherine up again? Well, we don't want to.
Can one more thing, and maybe this is more of Catherine's thing. So if we make that assumption that the 20 million is not encumbered anymore, what does that do to those ESSER full-time positions? Like how many of those, if we could move them? That's for later. You don't have to answer right now. I'm just curious. Does it do anything?
You're going to spend my 20 million twice?
No, it's not. It's not spent twice,
I'm
is it? Help me,
Okay.
finance people. I didn't just spend it twice today.
Well,
So it's
take
not-
the 20 out and
If we're not holding the 20 as a cost to put into the permanent improvement, because we're going to do a permanent improvement, don't we have 20 more million now to help solve some of the other questions that you had?
except you use the 20 million to lower your millage.
Absolutely.
Right.
Oh, okay.
That's why I said you spent it twice.
Gotcha.
Absolutely.
You
It's
spent
an
it one
offset.
time to lower the millage, and then you spent it a second time for those two people sitting on that table that like FTEs over there, those folks.
Sorry, I was trying to help.
Or three people, I don't know.
Chair Cole, I'll just
Yes,
share
ma'am.
that internally, our teams are working to look at the programming as well as the positions that we have on the ESSER budget. And so our homework assignment is certainly to be prepared to bring back for the March meeting what that looks like as we, as ESSER is expiring, those grant resources will no longer be available. We'll have certainly a plan as we're thinking about how do we prioritize the programming as well as some of the positions that need to move over to the general fund without adding an additional burden to the general fund. We recognize that we need to be very lean as we're having these conversations for right now until we do some of the work that we've just talked about. So that's our homework assignment. We have begun those conversations with each department and each team, but we'll be wrapping up those conversations and making sure that we have a plan to share with you for that March meeting.
I appreciate that. Is there a process in place that is evaluating the effectiveness of what has worked
Yes.
with ESSER and what we would intend to otherwise then build into a future budget to be sustainable? I think it's important as you guys are considering this $35 million cut that you're also really thinking through what has been effective on a per-cost student basis that has moved the needle for kids that could otherwise be sustainable.
Yes, so I know that Catherine can talk about this a little bit more in detail, but please know that for all of our ESSER expenditures, as a requirement for the grant, we had to make sure that we built in program evaluation. So we're looking at how we're going to monitor as well as measure the impact of those investments. Catherine, would you like to add anything to that?
And you don't have to be long, but yes.
This is work that she leads on a regular basis, so.
Thank you, Chair Cole, President Adair. As I've shared at quarterly updates, we started from the very beginning with an impact report process, and so we have significant data about the projects that we have funded and the impact that those have made on student achievement and the organization as a whole. So
Awesome.
we will have a well-informed, data-based decision as part of the planning process.
Awesome.
But
All
what
right.
I also said is that ESSER is showing us what it costs to effectively educate the children of Columbus City Schools.
That's part of this story.
Yes.
So thank you for that, Dr. Mosier. Yeah, this is very helpful. So we look forward to that information. Thank you very much for that update. We appreciate it. With that in mind, is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
All right. If there are no nays, we will move to adjournment. Thank you all for being here. Thank you for your constant work. We look forward to the rigorous work that's ahead, but it's a blessed one. It's one that's really going to benefit the lives of children and this community as a whole. So thank you. We'll see you next time.